Welcome to the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School Film Series. My name is Susan Hackley, and I'm the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation. The Program on Negotiation is a consortium program of scholars from Harvard, MIT, and Tufts universities who all care deeply about how to manage conflict and negotiate effectively. Today, we have the honor of discussing the wonderful and important documentary film, One Day After Peace. We will be joined by the filmmaker and others who will share their insights and discuss lessons from reconciliation processes for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The session is being recorded. The recording will be posted to the Program on Negotiation website a few days from now. You will find the link in the chat box. You, our audience, come from countries all around the world. We're so pleased that you have joined us. If you want to make a comment, please use the chat function. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now it's my pleasure to turn to Jim Sebenius, professor at Harvard Business School and vice chair of the Program on Negotiation. At PON, Jim heads up the Great Negotiator Award Program and co-chairs our Secretaries of State project. He is a leading scholar in the field of negotiation, and he does work around the world advising on complex negotiations. Now let's get started. Jim Sebenius.
Susan, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see so many people from so many places. My day job is at the Harvard Business School, where I teach graduate students and executives in negotiation, as well as across the university, students in negotiation and diplomacy. The film that you've watched before our session today, One Day After Peace, raises and dramatizes important issues for those of us keenly interested in negotiation and conflict resolution. Not just how to negotiate a peace agreement, but how former enemies, who often did terrible things to each other, can at a minimum live together, but potentially reconcile and even forgive one another. Conflict ending agreements generally force a tragic trade-off between peace and justice. Insistence on full justice with punishment for all those who committed terrible crimes often means no deal and no peace, and a continuing factory of victims and atrocities. Yet allowing perpetrators to go free or face minimal consequences for awful actions during the conflict can be intolerable for the victims, their friends, and families. So how to find the balance? Many countries, most recently Colombia, after the government's 50-year war with the guerrilla group, the FARC, have tried variations of South Africa's post-apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which of course you've seen in the film. We're looking at this film today and the discussion that follows before any peace agreement as between Israelis and Palestinians to see whether some form of reconciliation might be possible. I found the film, as I suspect you did, both emotionally powerful and deeply thought-provoking. So mostly this will be about your questions, but before turning to them, I want to briefly introduce our panel. Robi Damelin was born in South Africa during the apartheid era and emigrated to Israel, where she's the Israeli spokesperson for the Parents Circle Families Forum. This is a remarkable group of some 600 Israeli and Palestinian families who've lost close family members to the conflict and who now work together for reconciliation and a just resolution to the conflict. As you know from the film, Robi's son David was killed by a Palestinian sniper in March 2002 while he was guarding a checkpoint near a settlement during his Army Reserve service. Bassam Aramin is a Palestinian who lives in Jericho in the West Bank. At the age of 17, he was incarcerated and spent 7 years in an Israeli jail. He went on to study history and holds a master's degree in Holocaust studies from the University of Bradford in the UK. He became a member of the Parents Circle in 2007 after losing his 10-year-old daughter Abir, who was killed by an Israeli border policeman in front of her school. Bassam now serves as the Palestinian co-director of the Parents Circle Family Forum. And finally, Reverend Dr. Gary Mason is a Methodist minister and on the faculty of Maynooth University in Ireland. Gary directs a conflict transformation organization based in Belfast called Rethinking Conflict. Prior to this, he spent 27 years as a Methodist clergy person in parish ministry in Belfast, and has played integral roles in the Northern Ireland peace process leading to the Good Friday Accord in 1998. And the director of our film, Erez Lofer, has been working in the documentary world for the last 30 years in Israel and internationally. He's worked on numerous film projects with renowned filmmakers, and his films have won a number of awards. Before turning to your questions, I've asked the panelists to offer brief comments that will help us better understand the film, One Day After Peace, that you've watched. So let me first turn to Erez, the director, and ask you simply, what led you to undertake this film, and how is having done so affected you? Erez?
Thank you very much. I work in South Africa in the year 2000 as part of a group helping the local filmmakers making film about AIDS and HIV epidemic. And when I was there, it was 6 years after independence. There was one white director, one black director. The assistant editor was Afrikaners that used to be in the army in the apartheid area. And I couldn't stop thinking, how we gonna look, how it's gonna be if it's gonna be the same for us when the war will be over. And when we start thinking about the film, the name of the film was not One Day After Peace, it was The Future Is There, meaning we can look at our future in South Africa. And so I was fascinated about that. And I talked to my sister about that, and she starts searching and looking for cases. And of course, you have to look for something that you think it's a good story and relevant. You have to find the people that are willing to talk to you today. And also you have to find the testimony and the TRC that it was filmed, because it's a film, so you have to show it also. You have to, and also we understood that many films were done on the TRC, but actually we did it already with 15 years perspective. I think one thing that made us really making the film, that in our research, we met this woman because we were asking, how can you forgive, or will you forgive the one that kills your son? And she said, don't ask me to forgive. I will never forgive. But I'm glad that the state gave the amnesty, and we can keep going with our life. And I thought about it today, that the film show us a very emotional and hard cases. But when I start making the film, I thought about all the population, how we're gonna deal with the peace. Not only the one that have to forgive individually because someone their sons or daughter got killed. The reconciliation it's for the whole nation. And that's where the film started. And that's why we thought it's so important to bring this film to Israel public.
Erez, thank you. Robi, of course, you were centrally featured in the film, both being from South Africa and now living in Israel. Do you have a few words to help us understand the context of the film, or what we should think about before getting into the discussion? You're muted.
I think what we should think about while looking at all the names and all the countries and all the people from all over the world, that our message is not local. I think if it resounded so well with so many countries and so many people, it means that the world is hungry for a message of reconciliation. And I'm so grateful to you to Shula in particular, for having this idea to open the film to so many people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bassam, from Jericho, after you unmute yourself, help us understand what we should think about as we're going into the discussion of this film.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It's very important for us, as Robi says. It's very good movie, because for me, to spread their message, and she said it's not a local message, for Palestinians and Israelis. I want to take you back one day before peace. Try to imagine the same people who signed the peace agreement, the environment between the same people who signed the peace agreement one day before. It looks impossible, will never happen. So this gives us the faith that one day we will have peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Because when you sign peace agreement with your enemy, you understand or you believe that your enemy is exactly like you. It's a very deep value of reconciliation. When we talk about the truth, we need to tell the truth. There is no reconciliation under the occupation. Be clear. Reconciliation comes after peace agreement. And this is exactly what we are doing in the parent circle to prepare for this reconciliation process between the Israelis and the Palestinians in the future. We sign peace agreement between the two nations. Yes, it's a very personal thing when we talk about forgiveness, but it gives a sign that forgiveness is possible. It makes it easier. It gives lessons that we can forgive even the worst killers, and maybe they become the best friends if we recognize that they are human beings. They are not monsters. And if we take it to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's the same. Every conflict the same. The price is the same. We are losing our lives. We are losing our kids. We are losing our families. And we are not going to disappear, both of us, not the Israelis and not the Palestinians. We are here. We are not going to disappear. So we must live together. We must learn that in the end, we need to survive together. Or unfortunately, we will continue to kill each other because the Israelis deserve to live in security, and the Palestinians deserve to live in freedom in their state and also in security. There is no freedom for the Israelis, for the Palestinians, without security for the Israelis, and there is no freedom, security for the Israelis without freedom to the Palestinians. They need to release us from the jail of the occupation, to release themselves, to be oppressors, to rediscover our humanity, and to take responsibility. This is the reconciliation. It's to take responsibility about our past, to put it on the table. Then we can start a reconciliation process, even a forgiveness process. In general, we are not going to ask every Israeli or every Palestinian to forgive. It's a very personal thing. I say that I can forgive the victim who killed my daughter because I consider him a victim.
Bassam, it's hard to hear you. If you cut your video feed, the audio may be better. Thank
Okay,
you.
I got it. Sorry, I said it's not to enforce people to forgive. They need to understand that they want to forgive because this is their need. I said, I want to forgive the victim who killed my daughter because I consider him a victim. I want to give another example that we can forgive because it's a responsibility. We can use our pain in a different way, not only for revenge, not only for more killing. And we can see sometimes to forgive or even to talk to your enemy, it's much difficult than to fight your enemy. It's very easy to fight. But to look into his eyes, to talk as human beings, it's totally difficult. And I discovered that when I start to talk to my enemy, to combatants for peace, the ex-Israeli soldiers, when we create combatants for peace in 2005, 2 years before I lost my daughter, to understand that your enemy is exactly like you. But we don't need to love each other. We need to respect each other. And this is what we understand in order to be partners. And this is what Nelson Mandela says. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you need to work with your enemy. Then he became your partner.
Bassam,
So
thank you. Thank you very much. This is really important to hear as we begin the wider discussion of the film. Gary, of course, you were not involved either in the Israeli-Palestinian nor the South African situations, but Northern Ireland went through its own process. We've asked you to join, and I wonder if you have a few words to help us with what we should think about as we further discuss the film.
Yeah, I was just thinking there, Jim, if we were having this conversation in the early 1990s, most commentators were saying that the Israelis and Palestinians seem to be over the line with the Oslo Accords. Apartheid is ending in South Africa, and those Irish still have not got themselves sorted out. Here we are 30 years later, and it's a totally different scenario. Interestingly, George Mitchell, who chaired the talks leading up to the Good Friday Agreement, said, if you think getting this agreement was difficult, implementing it will be even more difficult. And while undoubtedly the Good Friday Agreement was a political miracle, 22 years after the signing of that momentous agreement, we are still moving through this process of dealing with the past and trying to deal with reconciliation. I often think back to a South African professor as apartheid was coming to an end, and I'll just highlight this quote before we move to our open discussion, where he said, reconciliation is no cheap matter. It does not come about by simply papering over deep-seated differences. Reconciliation presupposes confrontation. Without that, we do not get reconciliation, but merely a temporary glossing over of differences. He suggests the running sores of society cannot be healed with the use of a band-aid or sticking plaster. Reconciliation presupposes an operation, a cutting the very bone without anesthetic or anesthesia, because the infection is not just on the surface. He says the abscess of hate, mistrust and fear between black and white, nation and nation, rich and poor, has to be slashed open. So this process we call reconciliation is incredibly painful and incredibly difficult, but there really isn't any alternative.
Gary, what you say so echoes Bassam's comment that, relatively speaking, it's easier to fight than it is to undertake the task of reconciliation. I'd like to, as the moderator, ask a question to get things going from Robi. And Robi, have you met the sniper who killed your son? The film leaves that open. And if so, could you tell us about this? And if not, do you still seek to meet him? Could you conceivably reconcile or forgive this man?
Look, it depends what you mean by forgiving. But what happened was when I came back from South Africa, and having met Jim Sebenius, if you remember that scene where she said, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. When I came back to Israel after that film, I decided that it was time to meet with Thaya. That's the name of the sniper. And I spent a whole weekend, I kept saying everything's in the way. The police won't let me. The Minister of Justice won't let me. I don't have a mediator. Every possible excuse that you can think of, I thought of, and it was mainly me that was in the way. And so actually I went to meet the Minister of Justice, and at the time it was Tzipi Livni, and her, the person who ran her office gave me permission to go into the jail, and we were waiting for the police, and I asked for Bassam, who you've already met, to be the mediator. I couldn't think of anybody that I would trust more with this duty, because for me, Bassam is not just a member of the parent circle, he's my family, and that is about—
Not just a pretty face.
And so I spent a whole weekend where I suddenly realized that the person that was in the way was me. And having asked for Bassam and having got an agreement that that was okay, we suddenly had elections. And of course, then we got a minister of just us and another minister, even worse, just us. And now we've just had elections. You may have noticed we have rather a lot of elections in Israel. Hopefully the new minister will permit me to go into the jail, but there isn't that urgency that there was initially. And it's not about forgiving or not forgiving. It's about a sense of completion, almost a restorative justice situation, which would be beneficial for both of us.
Thank you, Robi. We have many interesting questions, and if I might lead one from Gonka Somez-Pool, who, paraphrasing a bit, was a question with which this person was left hanging was about Adrian Fluke. Did you, and here I address this to Erez, did you or Robi get a sense of how and when Mr. Fluke actually did make the switch in his heart and mind from being a minister with blood on his hands to someone washing the feet of one of the mothers who had lost her son? What was your assessment and reaction to that remarkable moment in the film and what preceded and followed?
I think he was very honest to tell Robi in the film that in the beginning, he joined the TRC and asked for amnesty in order not to go in jail. He was honest enough. But then he went through something, and in the beginning we were very cynical. But then we said to ourselves, he doesn't have to go every month and give them food. He can stay very comfortable with his big pension in Cape Town and not going. And we saw the big relationship, the very warm relationship with the women, with the mothers. So we start getting soft ourselves. And we start thinking, who are we to judge him? And in the film, we didn't plan to surprise this poor woman. We were just going with him to give food to the woman. And then some of the mothers say, oh, there's another mother's there, let's go there. And you can see in the film when she recognized him, she see the devil in front of her eyes. And then he washed her hands. And I know we always stay a little bit, question him. And when we had the opening in Johannesburg of the film, he went and picked up Maria, the mother, from a Melody Township. And we were waiting in the hall, and he came with her and Gadget, like walking together. And in that moment, I said, okay, it's not for me to forgive him. But in that moment, I said, okay, I think he went through something sincerely. That was my take on that. And Robi, I'm sure she can add on that.
Robi, what's your take? And you're muted.
Well, I had exactly the same experience as Erez. In the beginning, I thought how patronizing. You know, here he is coming in with his food. And then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, he doesn't have to do this. So many other people also got amnesty. They don't go to the location with food at any point. And when I saw him in Johannesburg with one of the mothers, I had tears in my eyes because that was the last thing you would have ever expected growing up in South Africa, to see an Afrikaner sitting with a black mother having coffee together at the age of like 70 and thinking to myself, there has been a miracle. And I never expected that. And for that, you know, when he said to me he would come and live in Israel, I was horrified because I thought he was identifying with everything that we have. But he's a complex character. And actually the whole transformation into his idea of Christianity, the question that you could ask, is he absolving himself by becoming Christian? And is this a way for him to absolve himself from the crimes? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that, but it's been running through my mind lately.
Bassam, a question that's recurred a couple of times in the chat and the Q&A function. Did you ever seek to meet the policeman who shot your daughter, your 10-year-old daughter, Abir? And why or why not? And probably, yeah, good.
Yeah, yes, I saw him in the court after 3 years. When it happened he was 18 and a half, teenager. But I was a different human being. I was in a different place. I really consider him a victim because when I talked to him, I told him that I need you to know that you are not a hero, you are not a warrior, you didn't kill the enemy or the terrorist, you just killed 10 years innocent girl. And if you think it's okay to kill my daughter, you can enjoy your crime. I don't ask for revenge because I don't take revenge from victims. For me, you are not less victim than your victim. But in any day in your life, if you come to ask for forgiveness, I will forgive you. But it's not because of yourself also. It's because I really, really love my daughter. And because I have another 5 kids. I don't want them to be victims to you. Why I think about him? Because I love my daughter. This is what we discovered, that we think about those. I wrote on her grave that your killer will die and you will live longer than him. No one will mention his name. No one will know his heroism, but everybody will talk about you and hear your name. It's when we talk about the same human beings, he's a human being, he's not a serial killer. When he come to tell his story, how he shot my daughter, maybe you will empathy with him. Maybe you will understand, maybe he was scared, whatever he says, he have a reason. And this has happened when my wife participate with a group of Israeli mothers. And just because they come to listen to the Palestinian stories and also to cry together, she said, I want to thank you. And when I talked to her, why you thank them? They belong to the occupiers. They occupied us. When they come to listen to us, we need to thank them. And she said, why should they come? Nothing enforces them. They can stay in their houses, in their safe places, in their nice areas, and they don't need to come to listen to our sad stories and to take responsibility. And this is exactly the point.
Bassam, thank you. I can't imagine forgetting the name of your daughter, Abir. Gary, a question that has come up in 3 or 4 forms, or a theme through 3 or 4 of the questions, is, as a minister and as someone who has participated both in a peace process and the long, imperfect implementation afterwards, what's the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness, or is there a meaningful difference? And how important is a sense of justice to either or both of those things? Because justice comes through in many of the questions, or the lack of justice.
I mean, Jim, that debate around forgiveness and reconciliation is continuing to go on even in our space. You know, people are saying, unless someone repents of what they did, I will not forgive them. Other people are saying, even if that person never repents, really what you're saying, Bassam, even if they never acknowledge what they did, for your well-being, for your family's well-being, you will exercise forgiveness. I mean, some political commentators, Jim, are actually saying we need to keep forgiveness out of political affairs completely. It shouldn't even be in there in the first space. And the other questions we're asking about reconciliation, I mean, can we have that without a multiplicity of things such as building socially just institutions, acknowledgement, reparations, apology, punishment, forgiveness? And people put these things actually in different sequences. From the concept of forgiveness, I mean, Bassam, you're spot on when you say you're forgiving to honor your daughter's memory. You're forgiving for your own mental well-being, but some have never been able to move towards that. I think it's really important, Jim, and religious leaders can do this. Religious leaders, and I say this as a religious leader, have the ability to make people feel guilty because they can't forgive, which is fundamentally flawed and fundamentally wrong. There's certain people will never be able to forgive. And I'm happy to say there's still aspects of my life that I need to learn to exercise forgiveness. So let's not label people or layer people with guilt in relation to this. But I think it's so important to say that reconciliation process, I mean, for us, I guess, in the Good Friday Agreement, as we moved up to that. In the early 1990s, we had what we called here a mutually hurting stalemate. And we all knew the history of this troubled island of Ireland. We can go on killing each other for another 100 years. But our hope is, in the words of John Hume, the nationalist politician, that the gun is finally out of Irish politics. But to ensure that, we need to continue this painful process of hearing each other, understanding, and trying to reconcile for the future of our children and grandchildren.
Gary, thank you. And to clarify something that has now come up several times in the chat and question, some people are wondering why we're not seeing the movie itself. And most people will have already seen the movie. We posted a link to it and suggested people see it before this conversation. The link is still up. The movie is still available. Sorry if that was a misunderstanding. A question that's now come up in a couple of different forms, and this is really for any or all of Robi, Erez, and Bassam. We're now in the era of the coronavirus, and it doesn't respect borders or nationalities or religions. Does it open possibilities for peace and or reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
So maybe I'll take that first, but I did want to say something about somebody being repentant for whatever they did. If you wait for somebody to be repentant, you will remain a victim for the rest of your life. So that isn't part of what I think about with my relationship with the sniper. It's for me just as much as for him. So I'm not waiting for repentance. Otherwise, I will still be a victim. And the other question, what did you just ask? Sorry, I was so involved with that I just couldn't.
Well, give it the question about whether the current coronavirus may change the situation to lead toward more possibilities of reconciliation.
Especially the coronavirus has really made me in touch with my age, and I think Netflix and Zoom should get the Nobel Prize. But if we're serious, we had we do a lot of meetings, we've continued to work. And some of the women said, you know what, this is the first time we came to your house and we don't need any permission from any government to allow us to come. And that is a very deep statement. And yes, I mean, of course it's better to meet face to face, but this is a wonderful way of us being able to communicate without asking permission from anybody.
Erez or Bassam?
For me, it's hard. For me, it's hard to say. I don't think it's nasty politics. So I don't think we can say nice things about the human nature that now we face the disease, but I think the politics is nasty. So I don't see any connection.
No connection.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and in fact, after the corona, we said that's it. The Israelis will get to understand that we face the same enemy. It's going to, we need to face it together, even the whole world. The whole world must be changed, their behavior. Unfortunately, we can see that we are going to more extremists, more land confiscated, more to strengthen the occupation. In spite, Corona told us, you are very weak, you are the same. Even you cannot face me. Unfortunately, on the political level until now, it didn't work, but I trust that we are people. We will learn how to change our behavior and how to see each other equals. The virus didn't make a difference between the Israelis or the Palestinians, even start with the Americans. So it's the same enemy. We need to stand against it together and to understand that we are very simple human beings. We need to face it together, and we need to respect each other and stop killing each other, stop occupying each other, because this is the answer for any security.
Thank you, Bassam. An interesting question has arisen across about the comparisons and the inexactness of the comparisons, whether it's Northern Ireland or South Africa or Israelis and Palestinians. There's a commonality in that there's a conflict, but there are enormous differences, one society and one situation to the next. The film heavily features the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'm curious, 15 years, looking at this a number of years after it was established and having seen how it operated, what do you see as the faults or mistakes or changes that either should have been made there, or if something like that were to find its way into the Israeli-Palestinian situation, what's good about it, and what would you do or design differently? Maybe Erez, I'll start with you on that one.
Okay, I just want to say, of course, when we were many screening, people told us it's irrelevant. We are so different. They are Christian. It's not the same conflict. But in a funny way, since we finished the film, it seems to be that it can be more relevant to us because of a two-state solution. We're getting further and further. So if we get in the end to a one-state solution, because there's no other choice, then the TRC is very relevant because we need to find a mechanism to even to free the prisoners from jail. Don't forget that the TRC has not just a very high ideas of reconciliation. It was a mechanic, it was a system how to give amnesty to people in jail. So that's the reason I see that it is relevant that in some way or another, we will need a mechanism to give amnesty to people, because otherwise we'll have to, that's what I'm saying, that the film even became more relevant as time come by, the solution in a way.
And of course, if I'm not mistaken, in South Africa, amnesty was only granted in about 10% of the cases. Is that correct?
I don't think so.
It was a larger number?
I think it was larger number.
I see, okay.
But I think they gave amnesty. I mean, it's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's more about the truth, because it was for the people who didn't know what had happened to their family members. And the only way that they could get the truth about what happened was to give amnesty. And so, you know, but talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think one of the problems that went on there was that there was not enough nurturing of the survivors. They took them, they gave evidence, but afterwards they were neglected. So that's just part of it. And I don't think, you know, I was thinking the other day about Breaking the Silence. That is a group of soldiers who come out of the army and tell their stories on camera of what they did in their army service. And for me, they are very, I think they are heroes. They are much vilified by the government. But if you think about it, those are the people that could give evidence in a reconciliation process. And so I think they are to be admired. But Israel and Palestine is not South Africa. We're going to have to find a way for us. We can learn a lot of lessons from South Africa, but it's not the same situation.
If I can add something, I think that the most important things in South Africa process, I mean, you can find many flaws. but the public watch the TRC meeting.
Exactly.
That's the most important things, because it's not just solving a personal case of Robi, a personal case of Bassam. When all the public see the cases, then it became powerful. Then it influenced the public. And I think that's the most important thing that I would love to take from South Africa. How they created as a national thing. When we talked to people, they said that was the best. Everyone was listening to the radio, watching the TV, and that's why we could have made this film, because they filmed everything, and they kept it.
And
You're
that's
also talking about the comparison of soldiers and children that get killed. And we were just dealing with this week, and I thought to myself, you know, the man who killed David didn't kill David, he killed his uniform. And that's a very hard thing to admit. But when I think about the people that are left behind, it's the same pain for a mother of a soldier or the mother of a child. It doesn't make any difference. And we have to look at that. We have to look at the people like me and Bassam, who are the consequence of this madness. And how do we stop this? And how do we not just take sides, but try to find a way to end the violence and to end the occupation, which is killing the moral fiber of Israel?
You've now, since the film was released, I think in 2012, is that correct?
Yes.
You've now been at many screenings of this film, each of you. Where do you find the greatest receptivity to the film, and where do you find the greatest resistance to what feels like the message? And that's really a question for any or all of you.
If I start, I feel that because of the emotional and the drama, we didn't get so much resistance. I think they treat even people that politically on the right side, they didn't feel that that they cannot grasp our film because it's human. So only in very seldom cases we got yelled at, me and Robi, because of the politics. The amazing thing for me that we made educational program with a high school student, actually with the Israeli government, as funny as it sounds, and we show it to 400. We gave the film for 400 civil teachers, and it's the first time I believe that sometimes film can make a difference, because some of the teenagers that saw the film were so moved by the ideas of, and it changed almost their politics view. I think it's the first time, because sometimes we make films, but we know that, like people hold the same political view as we, but it's the first time that I felt that this film succeeded to touch people's heart.
I think it also makes an emotional breakthrough, because that's actually all the work that we do in the parent circle is narratives. It's to tell your story. If you go into a classroom, an average Israeli classroom, they've never met a Palestinian in their lives. So you go together with somebody like Bassam, and he tells his story. And through the film, the same thing happened with Bushra. Do you know that Bushra today, the lady who sat with her back to me and looked at David's picture and said haram, which it means what a pity, that was her emotional breakthrough. And today, this woman is running dialogue groups, is one of the most important people in the women's group. She went through a total transformation. If you don't believe people can change, there's not much point in this work. But I think that the narrative will always touch. If you tell your story and it's honest and it comes from your heart, it can't not touch other people's hearts, even if they don't agree with you. And I think that's fine if they don't agree with us, as long as they're willing to have an empathy to listen. That's really what we're all looking for.
Bassam, which among the audiences that you've attended for screenings of the film, especially among Palestinians, who's been the most receptive, and where have you encountered the the greatest resistance?
Lou, in fact, I agree with Iris. It touched the people's hearts, and especially people like the Palestinian people who suffer from occupation. They have no justice, no freedom, those kind of movies or films touch them, it teach them. I think it will be very accepted, and when we run it sometimes in our groups in the parent circle, we can see the reaction in the Palestinians. Just to say a few words about the comparison. Of course, it's not the same place, but always I said, all the conflicts, there's something in common between them. As I agree with Iris when he said that it's more relative now to think about our future in the past. So yes, there is a lot of common between those conflicts, and we can learn a lot from each other.
Indeed, indeed. You know, one big difference, of course, between the situation as between Israelis and Palestinians and what happened in South Africa, or for that matter, Northern Ireland, is that there is no deal. And at the political level, to many of us, a deal seems further from possible than in a long time. Is there any equivalent or version of this Truth and Reconciliation Commission that might have a role before any sort of political broader solution to the conflict, or does that have to follow?
In my opinion, it has to be prepared. Sorry, Bassam.
Bassam, go ahead.
Sorry, Robi. I just want to be prepared. I want to give an example in the Israeli side. If we talk about breaking the silence, those are soldiers who serve in the Israeli army in the name of democracy. They go to sacrifice themselves to protect the state. And during their service, they give evidence what they did in the name of democracy. It's kind of, sometimes it's a crime, sometimes it's very brutal. But for us, this is exactly when we talk about the truth in order for reconciliation, future reconciliation. To give evidence about this brutality in the other side, which is create more enemies in the Palestinian side. So, on the other hand, if there is no if there is no Robi in the Israeli side, you will never find Aramin, you will never find Bassam in the Palestinian side. This is our job, in fact, to prepare, to let the people start to understand the word reconciliation from now, so it will be more easy after any peace agreement to start to talk about reconciliation, to continue this process in the future. It's very important to be prepared. For that, from academic point of view, Oslo fell down because the people, they are not involved in this agreement, and there is no reconciliation element in this agreement, which is maybe right.
Robi, do you think that there's a potential role for some analog to this commission before there may be a peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Look, if you look at South Africa, long before Mandela came out of jail, there were the ants on the ground working to try to find out how they could prepare some kind of reconciliation process so that there would not be a bloodbath. And I think in the film, Desmond Tutu says it very well, that if they hadn't had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there would have been a bloodbath. Now, we tried at one point to use some academics to write some form of what it would look like to have a reconciliation process between Israelis and Palestinians. And actually, it's a very difficult situation because it's the question of do academics work on the ground as well. Because what was happening is we got a lot of quotes of other academics without actual experience on the ground. And it's one of the things that I keep saying is that we need each other, that the academics need to work on the ground and the ground need the academics to create a process that might work. If you don't know the Palestinian or the Israeli mentality and you don't watch the work of reconciliation, I think it would be difficult to write something that would be appropriate.
Jim,
There is.
maybe comment there as well.
Gary, and then Eris.
Yeah, I mean, moving up to the Good Friday Agreement, I think one of the keys from the Irish peace process was that there was serious preparation of people on the ground, those who were non-state actors and those who were state actors. And that was absolutely crucial to move those up into that space, rather than, as you say, Robbie, just parachute this thing from outer space onto people as well. And I think, Jim, just alluding to the last thing, there is no conflict here that is identical, but invariably most of them involve land, identity, and religion. And I mean, we have 1,000 Israelis and Palestinians in Belfast. 250 of them have come through your good offices and Harvard programs of Israelis and Palestinians. And they know there's not identical, but there are lessons from all these conflicts. I mean, I know the work you've been doing in Colombia. Santos said categorically, the Good Friday Agreement influenced his thinking. So we're not identical, but we're in a global world and we need each other to move these processes forward. We can't do this in isolation.
Eris?
I just want to say, of course, I appreciated immensely what Robi and Bassam and the Parent Circle and all the people do, but I still think that probably we'll need a political solution in order to create a TRC. No, but also I think that don't forget in South Africa, the TRC didn't come about just because of the forgiveness. It came about as a mechanism that the leader of the military forced the transition to democracy in order to have a mechanism to get amnesty. So I think we'll have the political structure will have to form that, and then the important work is what the people will feel and they will reconcile.
But in South Africa, for many, many years, there was Alex Moraine and there was Charles Vicencio and there was Desmond Tutu, and they were trying to work out what to do. And I think we haven't got that. And politically speaking, I don't even want to make a comment about that, but that doesn't mean that we give up. That certainly doesn't mean that we give up.
No,
because this is the only light that there is in this horribly dark time.
A comment that has now recurred multiple times in the questions and in the chat. At one level seems sort of obvious, but what are the elements of respect that one hopes to get from a process like this? Several people have said until there's some degree of mutual respect, there really can't be any reconciliation, let alone peace. What are the elements of respect and how do you see it develop? Bassam, could I start with you on that? Because you've used the term respect often.
Yes, of course. I believe without respect, we cannot move forward at all. Because if you consider yourself the chosen people, I consider myself the chosen people. I cannot see you. I think you are my slave. We will never move forward as human beings and respect to make peace business or whatever. So it's very essential to treat others and to respect the other side, his dreams, his right to exist, his values, his different culture, his different religion, his different language. To practice it here, the full respect, then we can start to talk about peace and reconciliation and forgiveness. Otherwise, it will never work. So it's a key word, the main issue between, I believe, between human beings, especially in conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. We think that they deal with us as their way as official racism or discrimination. It doesn't work. They need to respect us. And exactly, we need to respect them if we want to go forward to any or reconciliation process. So I believe it's a very important word, respect, very important. It's a deep value in human relations.
So, Erez, the term respect, it's one that has recurred among the people watching our conversation. Does that term have a different meaning to you having done this film? Or how do you think about it?
I mean, for me, I don't know if this is the right point, but we had a meeting with some activists in South Africa, and they criticized Robi for putting herself at the same line as the black mothers that lost their sons, because her son was a soldier. And I was very insulted for Robi, and I thought that it was disrespect, because then I realized completely that I think that I turned and decided I'm completely for nonviolent action, because I think before that I could see myself supporting resistance and when justified cause for resisting the occupation or the apartheid, etc. But after being such disrespect to Robi, meaning making loss is a loss. So I think that's what, for me, that is what is respect. You respect each one lost.
The loss that each has, and of course, the parents' circle, the moral claim that people who've lost a close family member, a child, have when they talk about reconciliation rather than revenge is enormous. Robi or Gary, this term respect as an ingredient of moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I remember some of the groups, Jim, that come from your program, and two people who will be nameless who may be watching this today, but senior figures within the IRA and senior figures within the Ulster Volunteer Force, non-state actors. And I remember them both very humanly saying, if I had been born 100 meters away and the other person had been born 100 meters away, they may have made different choices. So I think humanizing the other person and respecting, so within that Israeli-Palestinian context, you know, if someone's daughter from Jericho had been born in Tel Aviv, they would have made different choices. If someone in Tel Aviv had been born in Nablus or Ramallah or Jericho, they would have made different choices. And it's that absolute humanization. I mean, we had 30,000 political prisoners within our space. And some of the things they did, obviously, as a religious leader, I am condemning categorically. They were morally wrong. Since they've been released, 2% of them have reoffended. 2%. So it begs the question, what kind of society did we create that made these, primarily young men, make these choices? It's not justifying what they did, but for me, and I say this unashamedly, we were dealing with toxic sectarian religion and toxic sectarian politics in this space for centuries that shaped people's mindsets to demonize the other. That's not justifying what they did, but we can't let religious leaders who are nothing more than sectarian bigots and politicians in my space who were nothing more than sectarian bigots get off free. They created a context to allow people to kill each other, wrong as the killing may be. So we're all in this mess together, and we need to get out of it together.
Robi, do you want to add to the comment about respect? And then I'd like to pull this together with a few remarks.
I think it's such an important part of all the work that we're trying to do, because there's this terrible cutoff between Palestinians and Israelis, and we really don't know each other. And so that's why I said, when you go into a classroom of an average Israeli kids and you ask them who of you have ever met a Palestinian, it's probably nobody. And we do a lot of this work. And who of you speak Arabic, maybe two in the class, and who's been overseas, 90% of the class. And if I go into a village in the West Bank to talk to women, why would they think I'm any different? All they've ever met are settlers or soldiers. So unless they can get to know who I am, they wouldn't respect. And so through this narrative, they begin to understand their humanity. And we're all saying the same thing. And respect comes from knowing who you're talking to. And we don't know. I've watched this in schools with kids who are so moved after they hear Bassam, and because they've never met a Palestinian before. And so we have to start breaking down all of these barriers. And I know I sound naive. I'm not, though. We just cannot give up.
Well, I want to deeply thank Robi and Erez and Bassam and Gary. This is an emotional and an intellectual challenge to take on board what this film means. What's really obvious, especially for those of us who often deal at a political level and who deal with high-level complex negotiations, that political principle and structures of negotiations and otherwise operate at one level. But when they're walls, whether they're physical or social, so that relatively few white South Africans really know their Black counterparts, or where Northern Ireland has a Catholic community largely insulated from the Protestant community, and many had never even been in the same room as when that process began. And certainly the level of personal connection as between Israelis and Palestinians is so reduced now that it's very easy for people to treat the other as somehow fundamentally different. And a message that this film, and I think your work, particularly in the Parents Circle, and Gary, what you've done in Northern Ireland, but this humanization of the other side, rather than operating at the level of sort of political principle or seeing another person as a uniform or as a member of a class rather than as another human being, it becomes very difficult to begin to create the empathy that can lead to the possibility of working together. And this film and your work, I think, show us both how difficult that is, but how necessary it is as an essential complement and support to what's going on at the larger political level that Erez pointed out has to take place. And I generally agree with that. You've made a very thought-provoking film, and I appreciate it. Each of you has contributed remarkably toward reconciliation, and I admire that. The audience has been very vocal with really great questions and really cutting comments. And I think when one looks at the chat function and the questions, you can't help but be impressed. So on behalf of the program on negotiation, I want to thank you for joining us, at least virtually, in a way that we actually couldn't when these events were limited to the physical participants. And I hope that you'll take some of these lessons home. For those of you who haven't seen the film or want to recommend it to others, you can find the film where you can watch it for free on the PON website. And within a few days, a recording of this conversation will be available as well. So thank you very much.